A brilliant black little girl, dismissed as nothing more than the janitor's daughter, walks into a corporate crisis where chaos reigns. The CEO, a man used to commanding attention, watches in disbelief as this child, with no credentials or formal training, solves the problem his team of experts couldn't. The system crash that threatened to bring the company to its knees becomes a lesson in humility and brilliance. But who will take credit for this unexpected hero? And what happens when the CEO's world is saved by a black little girl he never saw coming? Amara Thompson sat quietly in the corner of the Magnolia Technologies lobby, her worn sneakers barely making a sound as she fidgeted with the frayed edges of her backpack. At just 9 years old, she was already deeply absorbed in the world of technology, a world few kids her age could even begin to understand. While others her age played tag or spent afternoons in front of TV screens, Amara spent her days observing, learning, and fixing things that most adults would never even notice. Every day, Amara followed her mother, Jasmine, through the back entrance of the gleaming glass building. Magnolia Technologies, with its high-end architecture and sleek corporate atmosphere, was a world far removed from Amara's own. Her mother, Jasmine, worked as a janitor here, scrubbing floors and cleaning offices, while Amara quietly observed. Jasmine's work was hard and often thankless, but she never complained. She had grown used to the world treating her like she didn't belong, just as Amara had learned to stay invisible. While her mother moved through the polished hallways with a quiet, determined step, Amara would always slip into a corner of the lobby, clutching her worn notebook. It was a place where no one looked twice at her, and that was just how Amara liked it. It wasn't that she wanted to be ignored. It was that she didn't need to be seen. Instead, her attention was fixed on the pages of her notebook, where she sketched out intricate designs and imagined devices that could solve problems no one else even knew existed. In this quiet corner, Amara could dream. She sketched circuits and created ideas that bridged the gap between imagination and reality. The notes were full of scribbled lines and complex diagrams that didn't look like anything a child should know. They were blueprints for a future, filled with potential and promise. But to the people walking past her, she was just the invisible daughter of the janitor, a girl who was barely even a part of the building's story. No one cared about the notebook she carried with her everywhere or the strange, brilliant ideas tucked inside. Amara didn't mind. She had always known how to be quiet, how to stay out of the way. It had become second nature for her. She was content in her solitude, observing the world of technology from the sidelines. Discarded electronics became her toys. Broken radios, old phones, and even malfunctioning computers were treasure to her. Amara would take them apart, figure out what was wrong, and put them back together. She didn't have formal lessons or anyone to teach her. She had only her instincts and the endless hours of trial and error. She could make things work in a way that few could. Her mother often worried about her withdrawn nature. Jasmine would find Amara bent over her makeshift workbench at home, tinkering with broken devices. Sometimes, Amara would go silent for hours, her focus so intense that nothing could pull her away. Jasmine didn't fully understand her daughter's gift, but knew enough to let her explore it in her own way. Amara wasn't interested in socializing or playing with other kids. She was driven by something else, an unspoken desire to understand how things worked. But inside the sleek glass towers of Magnolia Technologies, no one took notice. To them, Amara was invisible. A child who sat alone, disconnected from the adult world she observed so closely. Her mother cleaned the bathrooms and vacuumed the hallways, while Amara, in her quiet way, immersed herself in a world that was out of reach. No one bothered her, and no one ever expected her to be anything more than the janitor's daughter. It was in this world, one where she was overlooked and forgotten, that Amara's true talent began to quietly grow. She understood systems in ways no one else did. She recognized patterns in technology and could fix things with a precision that most engineers would envy. Yet, her skills went unrecognized by those around her. The engineers, the CEOs, the employees, none of them saw her potential. They didn't see her at all. And so, Amara sat in her corner, her notebook open to another set of diagrams, and continued to dream. She might not have been seen by the world, but she was quietly preparing for the day when the world would finally recognize her. Little did anyone know, Amara was ready to change everything, without anyone even knowing it. The rhythmic sound of typing was abruptly interrupted by a loud, shrill alarm. It echoed through the sleek, glass-walled office of Magnolia Technologies, disrupting the quiet buzz that usually filled the air. A code red. The flashing red lights and the urgent tone of the alarm sent a shockwave through the building, jolting everyone from their tasks. The once orderly and calm workspace was now filled with chaos. Engineers, technicians, and executives scrambled, moving frantically in every direction. Screens that had previously displayed information now blinked blankly, their once pristine digital faces frozen in time. Code red. All systems down, shouted one of the engineers, his voice tight with panic. His fingers danced over the keyboard, attempting to restore control, but the results were fruitless. Another engineer stood nearby, tapping his tablet furiously, only to receive error after error, each one more discouraging than the last. The panic in the air thickened with each passing second. What happened? An executive shouted as he entered the room, his usually calm demeanor now replaced with a mixture of frustration and confusion. We've been breached. Systems locked. No access. A group of engineers huddled around screen, their faces pale, eyes darting from one another as if waiting for someone else to solve it. Firewalls down, one said, almost to himself. Malware? It's got to be malware. Another muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loud might somehow make it worse. In the lobby, tucked away in a quiet corner, Amara Thompson sat alone, her backpack on the floor beside her. She had grown accustomed to the busy chaos of the building, always watching in silence as her mother, Jasmine, cleaned the polished floors and the spotless offices of the tech company. Amara, who was not a part of this world of sleek offices and expensive gadgets, often felt like a ghost in the corner, ignored and unseen. But in moments like this, where the adults scrambled and panic filled the air, Amara felt a strange kind of clarity. She'd seen the patterns before. Her curiosity about technology and the things people often overlooked had given her the ability to recognize problems others would miss. She hadn't been listening closely to the words spoken around her, but the key phrases floated into her consciousness: locked out, failure, breach, access denied. Her mind was sharp, focused. It wasn't the first time she had heard these terms. She'd spent hours at home, reading tech forums, tinkering with old radios and broken computers, absorbing everything she could. The more she listened to the adults talk, the more certain she became of what had happened. They were looking at the wrong part of the system. She could see it in their faces, the confusion, the frustration. They were lost, trapped in their panic, and it was all unfolding right before her eyes. They were trying to fix the wrong thing. Amara's mind raced through the pieces of the puzzle, trying to make sense of the chaos. She leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She was just a kid, a janitor's daughter who was barely seen by anyone in the building, but she had a way of understanding technology that the adults didn't. They were missing the simplest thing. The vulnerability they were looking for wasn't random. It was the socket overflow loop. Without realizing it, Amara stood up, clutching her notebook tightly in her hands. She didn't feel the usual hesitation that came with speaking in front of so many adults. Something inside her pushed her forward. She couldn't just sit back and watch while they continued to waste time. "Have you checked the socket overflow loop?" Amara asked, her voice calm but sure. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. The engineers and executives paused, their eyes snapping to her, the only child in the room. Some looked at her with skepticism, others with a trace of disbelief. One engineer, an older man, scoffed and shook his head dismissively. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. But Amara wasn't deterred. She repeated herself, this time louder. "Check the socket overflow loop. It's a common vulnerability when the system tries to lock out and loop through security. Look at the pattern. Her words were simple, but the logic was sound. Most of the room ignored her, dismissing the suggestion as nonsense. It wasn't uncommon for people to underestimate her. After all, she was just a little girl, and in a world of high-level tech professionals, what could she possibly know? But then, one engineer, a young man named Victor, who had been standing near the back of the room, looked at her thoughtfully. His brow furrowed as he considered her words. "Socket overflow loop?" he murmured. "I've heard of that before. Let me try something." The room watched as Victor approached the terminal, his hands moving quickly over the keyboard. There was a brief silence before he hit enter, and then the screen flickered. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the system's interface began to respond. The back door that had been hidden from the rest of the team suddenly appeared on the screen. A collective gasp spread through the room. "It's working!" someone exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. The engineers scrambled into action, following Victor's lead. The panic that had flooded the building was slowly replaced by a sense of calm, as the system came back online, bit by bit. Amara stood in the corner, watching quietly. Her heart still raced, but there was a calm certainty in her chest. She had known it all along. She had seen the problem, understood it, and solved it, despite being the least likely person in the room. Her suggestion, however small, had made all the difference. Victor turned to Amara, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How did you—" he began, but stopped himself before he could finish the question. Amara just looked at him, her gaze steady. She wasn't expecting applause, nor did she feel the need to explain. She had solved the problem. That was all that mattered. As the engineers and security officers worked to contain the breach, Amara remained in her corner, clutching her notebook. She watched the professionals around her, observing their movements, their confusion turning into resolution as they followed her advice. No one spoke to her directly, but their actions told her everything she needed to know. They were starting to realize what had just happened. The little girl, the one they had barely acknowledged moments before, had just saved them all. And then, Amara felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly and saw a tall figure in a dark suit step into the room. It was Alex Dave, the CEO of Magnolia Technologies, his face unreadable as he surveyed the scene. He had been watching from a distance, his eyes trained on her with a mix of curiosity and something else, something deeper. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Amara, his voice steady but filled with a strange admiration. "You," he said, his tone barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" Amara didn't know how to answer. She wasn't sure how she had done it. It had just come naturally, like solving a puzzle she had been working on for years. But instead of responding with words, she simply looked up at him and said, "I just saw it." For a moment, Alex didn't say anything. He looked at her, his expression softening. Then, he nodded slowly, a silent recognition passing between them. "I think we need to talk," he said, his tone no longer commanding, but filled with something else, genuine curiosity. It was the beginning of something neither Alex nor Amara could have predicted. The invisible child, the janitor's daughter, had just done something no one else in the room could. The truth had been uncovered, and for the first time, Amara wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, not just for her actions, but for the brilliance she had always carried in silence. In the hours that followed the crisis, a strange calm settled over the office of Magnolia Technologies. The screens flickered back to life, the frantic scramble of engineers slowed to methodical, measured motions, and the air, thick with anxiety just moments before, seemed to lighten as the breach was finally contained. The staff had been pulled from the brink of disaster, thanks to Amara. The once bustling chaos had transformed into something almost surreal. The very people who had earlier brushed past Amara without a second glance, dismissing her as the janitor's daughter, were now in hushed conversations, murmuring among themselves as they processed what had just happened. The truth had hit them hard. The solution had come from someone they least expected, and the simplicity of it made them realize just how blind they had been. Victor, the engineer who had listened to Amara's suggestion, kept glancing over at her. His hands still hovered over his keyboard, his mind trying to catch up with what had transpired. It wasn't just that Amara had solved the issue. It was how she had done it. Her suggestion had been clear, precise, almost like she had known exactly where to look, like she'd seen the hidden path others couldn't find. It was rare for someone to think that clearly under pressure, but Amara had done it effortlessly. A few of the senior engineers, previously too proud to acknowledge anyone who wasn't part of their exclusive circle, were now gathering in small groups, muttering about how the kid had cracked the problem. The skepticism in their eyes had transformed into admiration. They were in awe, not just of her ability, but of her unassuming nature. She hadn't flaunted her knowledge, nor had she demanded recognition. She had just done what needed to be done. "Did you see that?" one engineer asked his colleague as they watched Amara from a distance. "She's 10 years ahead of any of us." His colleague nodded, still processing. She didn't panic like the rest of us did. She just saw it. Meanwhile, Amara sat in the same corner she had been all day, her notebook open in front of her, scribbling as she always did. She was lost in her world again, her thoughts wrapped around ideas and inventions no one had asked for, but which always seemed to make sense to her. The world around her had shifted, but Amara remained unchanged. She was still the quiet child with a notebook, watching the world go by. Only now it was different. She was still invisible, in a way, but it was a different kind of invisibility. This time, it was a quiet, powerful kind of recognition, the kind where everyone noticed you, but no one felt the need to say anything. The kind that came from respect, not from pity or charity. As the office began to settle back into its routine, Alex Dave stood outside the room, watching Amara from a distance. He had been observing the whole exchange from behind glass. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. Amara, a young child, had saved his entire company from disaster. In the past, Alex had always been about efficiency, about maximizing potential within the system. He believed in merit, in the idea that success was built on credentials and status. But Amara had shattered that notion in a single, unspoken moment. She didn't have the degrees, the titles, or the professional background. She had no business being in the room, let alone solving a crisis of this magnitude. And yet, there she was, a kid with nothing but her sharp mind and a quiet confidence that no one had seen coming. Her quiet presence intrigued him. She wasn't like the others, didn't conform to the typical expectations that came with her age, her background. She hadn't sought attention, nor had she demanded recognition. Instead, she had merely acted. And in that action, she had become the most valuable person in the room. Alex knew he couldn't let her go unnoticed any longer. He needed to find a way to nurture her, to ensure that her brilliance didn't go to waste. Not just for the company's sake, but for hers as well. He stepped forward and approached Amara, who was still absorbed in her sketches. She didn't look up when he came closer, her pencil moving quickly over the page, as though she were on a path only she could see. Alex hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach her. He had seen countless brilliant minds in his years at the helm of Magnolia Technologies, but never one so young, so raw in her potential. He cleared his throat gently. "Amara," he said, his voice calm but full of curiosity. She glanced up, surprised to hear her name. She hadn't expected anyone to speak to her, let alone Alex Dave, the CEO. Her eyes locked with his. "Yes, Mr. Dave, I want to thank you," Alex said, his words carrying an odd weight. "What you did today, it saved us. You saved us." Amara didn't smile, didn't shift in her seat. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "I just saw it," she said simply, returning her gaze to the notebook in her hands. Alex studied her for a moment, his mind whirring with thoughts he couldn't quite articulate. "You didn't just see it, Amara. You understood it. You figured it out faster than any of us. That's something special." Amara didn't respond immediately. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tracing the edges of her notebook. "I don't know why it worked. It's just how I see things," she said softly. There was a pause. Alex felt something shift within him. Something deep. This wasn't just about solving a problem. This was about potential, raw, untapped, unrecognized potential. He wanted to say more, to offer her something, but the words didn't come. For the first time in a long while, he found himself at a loss for how to express what he felt. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more, a sense of awe, a sense that Amara's actions had opened his eyes to a truth he had long forgotten, that brilliance wasn't always visible, wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it came from places people overlooked. "I don't know where you come from, Amara," Alex finally said, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. "But I know one thing. We can't afford to let talent like yours go unseen." Amara looked up at him, her eyes steady. "What do you mean?" Alex paused, considering his next words carefully. "I think you should be part of this company. I want to help you grow, help you develop what you've got. Not just because you saved us, but because I see something in you. Something special." Amara stared at him, her face unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, just took in what he had said. And then, slowly, a small, hesitant smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "I don't really know what to do with that," she admitted. Alex chuckled softly. "I don't think any of us do, Amara, but we're going to figure it out together." It was a moment of quiet understanding, the beginning of something that neither of them could predict. But one thing was clear. Amara was no longer invisible. Her brilliance had shattered that barrier. And Alex knew that he had to do everything in his power to ensure that Amara's light didn't fade into the background again. The morning sun streamed through the tall glass windows of Magnolia Technologies, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The day after the crisis, the energy in the building felt different. There was still a buzz of activity, but it was quieter now, more purposeful. The engineers had returned to their usual tasks, some still shaking their heads in disbelief at what had transpired the day before. They had all been saved by a child. Alex Dave, the CEO, stood by his office window, looking out at the city skyline. His mind was heavy, burdened with thoughts about Amara. The image of her, calm, poised, and quietly brilliant, had stayed with him all night. She was a kid, barely 9 years old, and yet her understanding of the breach and how to fix it had been far beyond anything anyone else had managed. She didn't just solve a problem. She had solved it in a way that none of them had even considered. He had seen potential in people before, but never like this. Amara wasn't like anyone else he'd ever worked with, and he knew, deep down, that her gift couldn't be wasted. He couldn't let her slip through the cracks like so many before her. Alex turned away from the window and glanced down at the note in his hand, an invitation for Amara and her mother, Jasmine, to come to his office. It was a simple note, but it carried weight. He had already made up his mind. He was going to offer her a future, a chance to thrive. Minutes later, Amara and Jasmine arrived. Amara's small frame stood beside her mother's taller one, her hands clasped tightly around the strap of her backpack. The two women had entered through the back door, just like they always did. Jasmine had been nervous all morning. Amara was still a mystery to her, quiet, withdrawn, but sharp as a tack when it came to her tinkering. What had happened yesterday had shaken something loose in Jasmine. She had always known her daughter was special, but now everyone else knew it too. Alex stood up as they entered, his posture firm yet welcoming. He gestured toward the seats in front of his desk. "Amara, Jasmine," he greeted them, his voice steady but warm. "Please have a seat." Jasmine nodded, her hands fidgeting as she sat down, her eyes never leaving Alex. Amara, as always, said nothing, but sat down in the chair next to her mother. Her gaze was steady, her eyes filled with quiet curiosity. Alex cleared his throat, his hands folded on the desk, as he looked at them both. "I want to thank you both again. What happened yesterday, well, it changed everything for Magnolia Technologies. Amara, you saved us. I don't think there's any other way to put it." Amara didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, looking up at him with wide, unblinking eyes, waiting for him to continue. Alex paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You may not know it, but you've done something extraordinary. And I want to make sure you have every opportunity to explore your potential. So, I've decided to offer you something," Alex said, leaning forward slightly. "A scholarship. It will cover everything: tuition, textbooks, mentorship, and it'll give you access to every resource we have here. You'll have a chance to continue your education in technology, to learn and grow in a way that most people could only dream of. Jasmine's eyes widened, and she glanced quickly at Amara, but the young girl didn't seem shocked. She just nodded, her expression unchanged. Alex could tell Jasmine wanted to say something, but she remained silent. Instead, it was Amara who spoke. "Will I still be allowed to break things?" Amara asked, her voice soft but clear. The question hung in the air, unexpected but direct. Alex blinked, momentarily taken aback by the simplicity of it. He had been prepared for thanks, or perhaps questions about what exactly the scholarship entailed, but this was something different. "Break things?" Alex echoed, leaning back in his chair, trying to process the request. Amara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I don't want to just follow rules. I need to break things, see how they fall apart, and then put them back together. I need to experiment. I need to figure things out my way." There was a quiet pause. Alex sat still, considering her words. It wasn't a childish request. It was a declaration. Amara didn't want to be constrained by protocols and guidelines. She wanted to be free to explore, to push boundaries, and to learn in her own way. She needed the freedom to experiment, to make mistakes, and to find her own solutions. In that moment, Alex understood. He had been running a company built on systems, efficiency, and rules. But this was different. Amara wasn't asking for permission to break things for the sake of destruction. She was asking for the freedom to grow in a way that most systems, especially his, couldn't accommodate. She wanted the space to innovate, to think beyond the conventional. Alex leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Amara, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but filled with certainty, "you can break things. You can experiment. You can explore. You don't need to follow the rules if they don't make sense to you. If anything, I think it's exactly the kind of thinking that we need more of here. I want to help you grow, and I want to give you the freedom to be yourself, to create without limitations." Amara's eyes softened, just a little. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something, gratitude, maybe, or understanding. She didn't need the applause or the recognition. She just needed the chance to explore and to learn, and that was exactly what Alex was offering her. Jasmine, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke up. "I don't understand all of this, but if you're offering this to her, Alex—" "I trust you," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "I just want her to have the best chance she can get." Alex nodded. "I'll make sure of it. This is just the beginning for Amara. I see a future for her, one that's brighter than anything she's ever had the chance to explore." Amara looked down at her notebook, her fingers tracing the edge of the pages, but this time it wasn't the usual distraction. It was something deeper, a realization that her world was shifting. She wasn't invisible anymore. And now, she had the freedom to break things, to rebuild them, and to find her own path. Alex watched her for a moment before standing up. He held out a small card, one with a simple logo and her name printed on it. "This is your official access card to our labs. It's all yours, whenever you're ready," he said. Amara took the card, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface. She didn't say anything, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in her gaze. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was a creator, a builder, someone who could change the world, not by fitting into it, but by breaking it apart and making something new. For the first time in her life, Amara felt like she truly belonged. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.